Hi, I'm the Guitar Trooper, YouTube's favorite old guy. It's late 1965. One of the ongoing tasks of Bob Mack, record collector turned DJ and owner of both Tri-State Record Shop and a local string of teen nightclubs, is to find new records in order to keep his patrons dancing and happy. One of Bob's favorite sources for such songs is bulk lots of used records that he occasionally purchases for his shop. Among worn copies of well-known records, these grab bags sometimes contain obscure singles that he finds to be danceable records. On this particular day, his search of a used record collection yields a record by some group he had never heard of named the Shondells on a label that he had never seen called Snap. It has the intriguing name of Hanky-Panky, and Bob is curious enough to give it a listen. What is to follow is a bizarre tale of coincidence and targeted marketing. Hanky-Panky will become a launching pad for one of the most successful U.S. domestic pop groups of the 1960s, even though the group that recorded that song no longer existed by the time on that fateful day in 1965 that Bob Mack picks up Hanky-Panky from a pile of used records. This tale begins in September 1964, Niles, Michigan. Thomas Gregory Jackson, who goes by the name Tommy, is 17 years old. He is still in high school and playing in a band with some friends. They call themselves the Shondells. Tommy also has an after-school job at a local record shop named The Spin It, and he and the Shondells begin to play gigs around the area and to make a name for themselves, gaining some local popularity as a cover band. One of Tommy's pastimes is sneaking into a local club called Shula's on Sunday afternoons, which wasn't really hard to do because the Shondells had played there, so the bartenders naturally assumed that Tommy was of drinking age. Anyway, Shula's always had a rock band on Sundays, and Tommy knew quite a few of the players, so it was an opportunity to visit as well as listen. One Sunday, he is there listening to a band that were friends of his, but he hadn't seen for a while, called The Spinners, and takes notice of one particular song in their set. It is generating a ton of audience reaction and requests, and it sounds like it's pretty easy to play. When the band takes a break, he asks the drummer if they wrote the song, and if not, where did they find it? The drummer says that they had picked it up weeks before from another band that was playing it in their set. The Spinners looked for the record but couldn't find it, so they just made up whatever words that would fit. The song was called Hanky-Panky. Well, by the end of the night, Tommy is convinced that the Shondells should add Hanky-Panky to their set, even if they have to make up even more lyrics. Monday afternoon at the Spin It record shop, he has his pal John look up the song in the record retailer guidebook, and it turns out to be the B-side of a thing called That Boy John by the Raindrops. The record was quite obscure. It seems that the main reason it is so scarce is that it was released in November 1963, just before the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and the title was simply too close to referencing the fallen president. So it was yanked from the shelves not long after it was released. At band rehearsal, all Tommy could remember was the chorus line, "My baby does the hanky-panky," so he threw together some words that could pass for a verse, and the band learned the song in one session. The next week, the Shondells' imitation of the Spinners' imitation of Hanky-Panky becomes part of their set, and it gets the same tumultuous audience reaction that Tommy had seen at Shula's. The crowds love it. It's late October 1964. With all of the positive response that they got from playing Hanky-Panky in their set, Tommy wants the Shondells to make a record as fast as possible so that they will be the first one out with it locally. The band gets some time at the small recording studio inside the radio station WNIL and records Hanky-Panky, along with a thrown-together B-side called Thunderbolt. Local DJ Jack Douglas runs a small record label called Snap and had already recorded a few songs for them in the past months, although with no market impact. Like the other singles, he produces this one for them and agrees to promote it. The next week, with the intent on promoting the record on WNIL, Jack places a stock of Hanky-Panky in every record shop that he can find in the area, including, of course, Roulette Records in Niles. It's early 1965. Word of mouth and airplay on WNIL makes Hanky-Panky a hot record everywhere in the Niles, Michigan area. Riding the wave of success, the band begins to book their own dance events, complete with promotional posters from local art students and articles in the regional newspapers. Things are hopping. But the attention gets no further than the Niles, Michigan area. You see, in the world of AM radio, it's difficult to post a hit record without getting very powerful 50,000-watt stations to play it for their huge audiences. In spite of the local success with Hanky-Panky, the Shondells have yet to be able to get it into the hands of those powerful stations in Chicago and Detroit, and inevitably, the fervor over Hanky-Panky, along with the hopes of the Shondells to break out of Niles, Michigan, begins to fade as the spring of 1965 arrives. The school year of 65 ends, and effectively, so do the original Shondells, as the members scatter to pursue their post-high school careers. It's April 1966. Since graduation, Tommy has been a gigging musician in 3 different cobbled-together groups and has been playing residencies at some Chicago nightclubs, even having one of them go bankrupt overnight in the middle of the first week of their contract. He is now back home, playing at another club in nearby South Bend, Indiana, with the latest group called the Coachmen. The phone rings. It's from one of the guys at Roulette Records, where Tommy had worked in 1964.
Tommy, where have you been?
It seems that Jack Douglas is trying to track down Tommy because someone at Fenway Record Distributors in Pittsburgh had called trying to find Tommy. So he called Jack, who had no idea Tommy was back in town. Jack is frantic. Hanky-Panky was #1 in Pittsburgh. This was crazy. They never sent any records to Pittsburgh. What's going on? Somehow, one of the 1965 Snap records ended up in a used record collection, and a Pittsburgh DJ and club owner named Bob Mack had found it and started using it in his dance clubs. It became popular, very popular. People wanted to buy it, and the radio stations in Pittsburgh wanted to play it. But there were no copies available. So Mack had Fenway Distributors press new copies of the record on their own Red Fox label. It was the very definition of a bootleg recording. The demand outstripped the first pressing, and they kept making and selling more and more of them, eventually selling 80,000 copies. Bootleg or not, it had become the biggest-selling single ever in Pittsburgh. Seeing such response, Bob Mack wanted to arrange a promotional weekend with some personal appearances of Tommy, but the only information on the label, besides his name, was the producer, a J.D. Deffenbaugh, which is Jack Douglas's real name, and Niles, Michigan as Snap's location. Finding Snap Records out of business, he called the record store in Niles, Roulette Records, and Roulette called Tommy. Flabbergasted, Tommy agrees to the proposal. As soon as the last set with the Coachmen is finished on Thursday, Tommy and Jack drive overnight to Pittsburgh and do a marathon of appearances and radio interviews. The reception there is phenomenal. On the last evening in Pittsburgh, Bob Mack, Jack Douglas, and Tommy have a strategy meeting. It is agreed that Tommy will return with the Shondells the next weekend and play heavily promoted appearances at several of Bob's night spots. It's a great plan. But of course, Tommy is still without any Shondells, and Jack is opposed to the Coachmen taking on the role, so they need to find a guitar band that's willing to be the Shondells for a weekend, and they need to find it fast so that they can come up with a passable set of songs before the next weekend. In just a day, Jack finds a group, coincidentally named the Shondells, that is willing to be the Shondells, and after a hurried rehearsal, they play the next weekend in Pittsburgh at several of Bob Mack's dance clubs. True to the arrangement, when the weekend in Pittsburgh is over, so is the relationship with the guys that posed as the Shondells, and Tommy remains without a band. They will just have to deal with that later. With this kind of audience excitement, there is no doubt that the next step is to clinch a national distribution record contract for Hanky-Panky, plus any future compositions. In 1966, the place to go for record contracts is New York City, and on May 4th, Bob Mack, with Tommy in tow, fly from Chicago to New York City to sell the record. Once there, they meet up with a talent agency friend of Bob's named Chuck Rubin, and one by one, the guys visit the offices of the major record companies, playing Hanky-Panky for the executives and talking record contracts. Because the trade papers had already picked up on the phenomenon in Pittsburgh, all of the companies say that they are interested in doing a deal. The last offices they visit are those of Roulette Records, but they can't get a meeting because the president is out, so they just leave a copy of the 45 and contact information with his secretary. The next morning, Tommy finds out that all of the record companies that had enthusiastically proposed deals the day before had called Bob Mack that morning and told him that they were withdrawing their offers. They all backed out, except one, Roulette Records, whose A&R guy called and said that they were ready to sign a deal. One of the reneging label's representatives spilled the beans. It turns out that Morris Levy, the owner of Roulette, who had returned to the office to find that Tommy and Mack were looking for a record deal, got on the phone to every other record company executive and explained to them in no uncertain terms that it was going to be Roulette's record. Tommy had only heard rumors about Roulette and didn't know it then, but Morris Levy and Roulette Records had more muscle behind them than the other companies were willing to challenge. And what Morris wanted, Morris got. No questions asked. Bob and Chuck meet with Morris Levy that morning, and they return to the hotel with a deal from Roulette. Before Tommy goes with them to sign the contract, Bob asks him how he wants his name to appear as the frontman of the group. Tommy had always thought that Jackson could be changed to a single syllable if he was going to be a frontman, but he had never thought about it seriously, and that one syllable should be something that does not change his initials of TJ. He ran through one-syllable J names in his head, and in a few seconds he said, "How about Tommy James?" This is when Tommy Jackson, the teen guitarist from Niles, Michigan, became Tommy James, the frontman for the Shondells and the main moneymaker for Roulette Records, which was a very successful record company, and a financial front for the Genovese crime organization. After signing with Roulette, Tommy went in search for a permanent replacement for the Shondells and found the Raconteurs, who agreed to become the Shondells and ended up playing alongside of him until 1970. Roulette Records took Hanky-Panky to national distribution, and it was a smash hit, as were Tommy James and the Shondells. It hit number 1 in July of '66 and marked the beginning of a love-hate and sometimes scary relationship between Tommy James and Morris Levy, and a series of hit records over the next 4 years. Morris Levy, who built a huge music business empire of over 90 companies, gained a reputation for, among other shady and many times illegal activities, of withholding royalties owed to artists on his record label. The unpaid royalties to Tommy James were in the millions. In spite of the drawbacks of being an artist on Roulette Records, though, Tommy has said that the artistic freedom that he enjoyed while with Roulette would not have happened under other labels, and it is quite possible that Tommy James and the Shondells would not have even half of the market success that they eventually garnered. Jack Douglas went on to become a producer at the record plant in New York, working on recordings from industry giants such as The Who, Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, John and Yoko Lennon, and many, many others. Bob Mack, whose real name was Robert McConnell, the man who arguably was the solely responsible person for launching Tommy's career, didn't remain associated with Tommy James and the Shondells for very long. Soon after the group signed with Roulette, Morris had Bob Mack fired as their manager when he went to Morris asking for more money, and Morris replaced him with Lenny Stogel. Tommy James, now 77, continues to be active in the business today, and he's still writing music and making appearances with a new band. All said and done, Hanky-Panky was a made-up-on-the-spot song from the very beginning, as Barry and Greenwich whipped it up in the middle of their 1963 studio session just because they needed a B-side for That Boy John. They apparently didn't really care what they were singing either. Their original 1963 lyrics are just as inane, or maybe even more so, than those manufactured by Tommy in 1964. Hey everybody, thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do me a favor and click on that like, thumbs up icon and leave a comment. Let me know what you think. You can also use comments to suggest video subject matter regarding pop music and pop music culture between the 1950s and the 1970s. A great thing that you can also do to support the channel is just share the video with your friends. Just click on the arrow icon and pick the destination person and help us expand the audience. Speaking of supporting the channel, this would be a great time to subscribe if you're not yet a subscriber. It's easy and it's free, and it lets YouTube know that you support the channel. Just click on the subscribe button and be sure to select the top notification bell on the next drop-down menu so that you will be notified whenever I post new content for the public. If you would like the opportunity to see content a few days earlier when it is viewable only to channel members, you can upgrade your subscription to become one. Just click on the join icon and follow the instructions. It's not free to upgrade, but it's as dirt cheap as YouTube would let me make it. Thanks again for watching.